Who among the apostles had his name fixed in the heart of Jesus? And the answer is Judas. The name of Judas was in the heart of Jesus. As it were, the heart of the Lord was fixated on him. Why? Because Judas needed him most. Why? Because Judas needed redemption the most. Why? Because Judas needed assurance the most. Why? Because Judas needed strengthening among the 12. Jesus had his eyes and heart and mind fixed on Judas because Judas was the weakest and Judas needed the greatest of redemption. Who among the 12 had his name fixed, printed in the heart of the Lord? Before we answer the question, let us look at the moral teachings of the church. Let us look at the mystical tradition of the church. And then let us ask ourselves again the question, among the 12, whose name was written in the heart of Jesus, that was number 1? As it were, the apple of the eye, the favorite of his heart was fixated on this apostle. Could it have been John, the beloved, who leaned his head on the chest of the Lord, and then who was spared from martyrdom and reached old age living for the Lord? No. Could it have been James the Lesser, who became the first bishop of Jerusalem and who was first to be beheaded, the first to be martyred for the sake of Christ? No. Could it have been Thomas, whom the Lord knew would doubt his resurrection, and then his eyes were fixed on Thomas so that he would not doubt? No. Could it have been James the Greater, who left Israel and went to Spain and then preached the gospel there? And the Virgin Mary appeared to St. James in what is now called the apparition of Our Lady of the Pillar in Saragossa. Could it have been James the Greater? And the answer is still no. Could it have been Peter, who was Prince of the Apostles, who later on became the first Pope, and whose successors are now called Vicar of Christ? Unfortunately, the answer is still no. If you look at the moral teachings of the church that says, I have come not to call the holy, but sinners. If you look at the mystical tradition of the church, where the heart is wounded by sinners, who among the apostles had his name fixed in the heart of Jesus? And the answer is Judas. The name of Judas was in the heart of Jesus. As it were, the heart of the Lord was fixated on him. Why? Because Judas needed him most. Why? Because Judas needed redemption the most. Why? Because Judas needed assurance the most. Why? Because Judas needed strengthening among the 12. Why? Judas was making himself distant from the Lord. The Lord did, and he contradicted. The Lord reached out, and he protested in the name of money. He was a chosen man, and yet he kept on pushing the Lord away and distancing himself away from the Lord. After distancing himself away from the Lord, he turned disloyal against the Lord. You know the story. 30 pieces of silver and 1 kiss. That is a very simple story. 30 pieces and 1 kiss. That is the story of disloyalty. And added to the disloyalty is despair. To give up. To say, I am hopeless. Despair cannot be from the Holy Spirit. Discouragement is not from God. Disloyalty is not from God, because God has always been loyal and loving and faithful. So, Jesus had his eyes, had his heart fixed on Judas. Not because he was the most handsome, not because he was the most intelligent, not because he was the most holy, not because he was the most zealous. Jesus had his eyes and heart and mind fixed on Judas, because Judas was the weakest and Judas needed the greatest of redemption. And unfortunately, in spite of that invitation, Judas fell into despair and then did what he did. Now, my dear brothers and sisters, why do I have to tell you that Judas is the favorite of Jesus? That Judas is fixed in the heart of Jesus? Because if you really believe that your name is written in the heart of the Lord, it is not because you are the holiest. It is not because you're the most obedient of the 10 Commandments. It is not because you're the most generous among the donors. It is not because you're the happiest among the parishioners. Your name is written in the heart of the Lord because He has a special concern for the weak ones, for the disloyal ones, for the distant ones, and for those who are prone to depression, to discouragement, to despair. But that is only half of my homily. The other question we need to ask is, who is in your heart? Whose name is written in your heart? You tell me, Jesus. If we are sincere, we know it is not always the Lord. Somebody else, something else, an event in the past is written in that heart, disturbing you right now, causing you sleepless nights, causing you trouble, making you afraid, making you anxious, even leading you to despair and saying, I am beyond redemption. But I will go one step further. Among mortals, among men and women, whose name is written in your heart. Your husband or wife, your children or parents, they are beautiful people. They love you. Now try to name in silence that one whom you consider loved one, but runs away distantly from you. Try to mirror in your soul that beloved one whom you really want to bring to the Lord, but has turned against you. You treated as a friend, but has been disloyal to you. And your relationship with that person is a relationship of one kiss and one bag of 30 pieces of silver. Who is that person in your life who cannot be trusted, who keeps on violating His words, His promises to you? Who is that person in your life who wants to run away from you, who makes it so difficult for you to love him and to love her? If you really want to make a good Holy Thursday, and if you want to make a good Holy Week, be honest. Jesus is not always in your heart, isn't it? And be honest. You have closed your heart to those who say, I want to run away from you. Ayaw mo sa akin? Ayaw ko. Taksil ka? Wala akong pakialam sa iyo. Gusto mong magpakamatay? Ituloy mo. Name that person, because that person has a right to your heart if you want to be like Jesus.